Welcome to another review. Today I'm going to be taking an in-depth look at Rise of the Ronin and answering the question, is it worth full price? During my playtime, this game has received multiple updates that included a wide variety of bug fixes, quality of life improvements, and additional content. Now this answer is subjective, but like all my reviews, I'm going to give a factual analysis of everything good and bad about this game. And as always, for full transparency, we're going to start with the bad. This game kind of glosses over and poorly explains a lot of its more complicated mechanics. There's a lot to take in for new players, and trying to learn everything at once can be overwhelming. The counter-spark system, for example, is briefly explained only once in the very beginning of the game, despite its importance and intricacies. In addition to this, you have no way to practice without the risk of losing karma early game. The fact you have to defeat a fairly challenging boss just to unlock the training dojo further compounds with this problem. And what makes matters even worse is, the dojo isn't even available until about 5 hours into the main story. They should have done a better job with the pacing. More time should have been spent familiarizing the player with the combat system early on, gradually easing them into everything. The Violent Gale skill also desperately needed its own tutorial and training segment. Another issue I encountered was the number of combat styles for each individual weapon. The only weapon in the game that consistently gets new styles throughout the entire game is the katana, while most other weapons have limited offerings in comparison, with lengthy gaps between finding new styles and rank progression. The stealth sections also felt far too easy, especially after upgrading your assassination abilities through the skill tree. The enemies are short-sighted and basically deaf. They won't react to gunshots or any fighting they can't immediately see. They're also very predictable and easy to outsmart. Once you've fully upgraded your abilities, you're able to one-shot crowds in quick succession and even stealth attack bosses, removing any sense of challenge from any scenario that allows stealth. This is easily one of the most overpowered things in the game. I was also disappointed that the co-op here applies exclusively to the main missions and nothing else. It's functional, but playing with 4 people honestly makes everything far too easy. I believe this game is at its best as a solo experience when it comes to the main missions. You do have the Wandering Swordsman, which is similar to the Renvent system in Noe. They're AI controlled characters with loadouts from other players that you can see freely roaming around in your game world. There are other pseudo-online mechanics here as well, like if a player dies at an enemy camp, there's a chance they'll be a prisoner in another player's game that can be freed and fight alongside them. On top of this, you have the Pilgrim Dogs, which allow you to share your wealth with other players. And while I do consider these positives, I still think it's a bit disappointing that we're not able to access the open world with other players. At least just one player. It would have been nice if we had one player that could come into our game world. In addition to this, I was also disappointed with how the open world was handled. As you progress through the story, you're eventually removed from the open world map and briefly placed into isolated areas before eventually accessing the new open world map in the next city. All of the locations you're briefly placed in throughout the game are fairly small, and even though the travel restrictions have story relevance, I still felt like you were needlessly removed from the open world far too often. You're able to travel back to the previous destinations through time travel, thanks to the Testament of the Soul, but I was expecting the open world to be larger and seamlessly connected. I was also annoyed by the linearity of some of the dialogue choices. While some choices have a wealth of option with multiple branching paths, others continuously present you with a few choices that ultimately lead to the same outcome. On top of this, the main story also funnels you into a singular path towards the middle of the game. Regardless of all your previous choices, you are pushed into certain positions despite what you do or who you're aligned with. The game design is conflicting with the writing at times, in my opinion. The writers did a great job at depicting a conflict centered around ideology instead of morality. There isn't really a right or wrong side here, just two groups with opposing opinions on Japan's future. Meanwhile, this is consistently undermined by the fact that the developers clearly favor one side over the other, and they give you multiple chances to defect. Numerous times throughout the story, you can clearly see which side they favored. Lastly, the overall visual presentation was slightly inconsistent. Turning off the noise filter drastically improved the image quality, but there are still areas and locations that look disproportionately better or worse than the rest of the map. The majority of the main missions look considerably better also. Specific items and areas had higher quality textures, more detailed environments. Some of them even used ray trace reflection in the ray trace mode. I also noticed inconsistencies between some of the cities as well. The vast majority of Kyoto's map looks significantly better than any other city in the game. Overall, I feel like the second half of this game had far better visuals, and I honestly don't understand why the entire game couldn't have looked this good. Sadly, the majority of the first half looks okay to average at best, and the visual inconsistencies between items and locations can still be glaringly bad at times. In numerous places, the graphics and some of the animations are clearly lacking in comparison to other next-gen titles. Screen tearing and pop-in, along with a few other minor visual issues, further add to this problem. Overall, this is still a good-looking game that's dragged down by bad design choices and a lack of polish. Alright, now let's talk about some of the things I actually did enjoy about this game. I really enjoyed the story and setting here. Rise of the Ronin is set in Japan in the mid-19th century during the final years of the Edo period. The game depicts the Busan War between shogunate and various anti-shogunate factions displeased with Western influence after the forced reopening of Japan. The story follows the Blade Twins and their involvement in the Veiled Edge Resistance Group. Trained by the Veiled Edge leader, the Blade Twins begin their mission to overthrow the shogunate. The story here is closer to an anime than it is an accurate, historical retelling of history. This is, very fiction based. There's a lot of things in here that, are not grounded in reality at all. Now, it doesn't get as crazy as Noe. There's no demons or anything like that, but for the most part, this is very much an anime-esque type game when it comes to the story. Now, it does have some type of historical relevance, but for the most part, this is not accurate. Now, this game does have a character creator for both of the Blade Twins, along with the option to customize or redesign whichever one you choose to play as. After you beat the game, you are able to freely customize both Blade Twins, and I feel like the overall customization from the character creation is pretty good. I feel like it's actually top notch in my opinion. When it comes to the story, you're not forced into picking a side at the very start of the game. You're even allowed to remain neutral for the first half, but there will be certain choices throughout the entire game that will influence who you'll be fighting for until the plot eventually forces you to choose between the two opposing factions. Depending on who you accept missions from, certain allies will not join you in certain missions, and they may lock you out from increasing your bond with allies from opposing factions. One of the things that surprised me is the numerous characters that called me out for playing both sides.
I know about you. How you're working for both Taka and Katsura. Listen, I'll see who'll pay the highest price, then split the proceeds. And if you don't cooperate, I'll reveal everything. Neither of them will ever trust you again, will they?
Your choices definitely matter throughout the entire game, and the game world will take notice of your neutrality. All this made the vast majority of side quests far more interesting, because the game incentivizes neutrality with the rewards from the bond system. Bond missions are side missions that are relevant to the NPCs you choose to befriend throughout your playthrough. Finishing bond missions will increase the bond level for that NPC as well as their level of favor. Increasing bond levels grants a variety of different bonuses, such as items, equipment, and more. Rise of the Ronin has many characters you can form bonds with throughout your journey. Some of these characters can join your party as playable characters, teach you new combat styles in the dojo, some of them can even be romanced. I really enjoyed the bond missions, most of them felt very high quality and linked directly to the main plot. Now, bond missions are only available during specific story chapters, so be sure to take your time during your first playthrough. Now, you can go back and play these whenever you want to with the Testament of the Soul, but like I said, a lot of this links directly to the main plot. And I feel like you get the whole picture of the story when you do all the bond missions for each chapter. This game is also packed with tons of content, and I love how most of it has a synergy within the game world. You're consistently incentivized to complete various activities, for example, finding Veiled Edge banners, clearing public orders, or taking down fugitives will quickly increase your bond level with the region. This will reveal more of the map, showing you collectibles and unlocked side quests. Along with all of this, combat styles can be gained by defeating certain fugitives in each region. Once you have these unlocked, you can upgrade them by progressing your bond level with specific characters or beating them in the dojo. This gives you multiple reasons to explore and complete the side content, because most of this game's content links together. I also really enjoyed the hidden bosses and photography missions. There's a really nice variety of content present here throughout the entire game world. By the time the credits rolled, I had invested 80 hours and there was still far more content from the base game and updates to complete. The combat system here is easily the best thing about this game. It's similar to Noe 2 but with a much higher focus on parrying. The biggest difference in Rise of the Ronin is the combo strings are centered around only the square button, but there's still some variety here. Holding the square button or using square plus the left analog stick gives you additional attacks for each stance. One of the ways Rise of the Ronin compensates for having just one attack button is the addition of the counter spark system. Pressing triangle with successful timing will deflect enemies' incoming attacks, temporarily causing enemies to panic, making them vulnerable to critical hits. What I like most about this system is that it's offensive and defensive all at the same time. I also enjoy the clash of blades against highly skilled opponents. It's a nice touch that I wish I saw more of in other games. Successful deflections of all attacks in a combo will cause the enemies to panic for extended periods of time, and even if you make some mistakes, the damage taken is reduced. The different fighting styles that force you to learn your enemy's timing create a unique addictive challenge for every major fight, and the more you play, the more you understand the depth of the minimalism present here. This game has also modified the weapon stance system from Noe 2. Each combat style in Rise of the Ronin falls into one of three categories: Tin, Chi, or Jin. The Tin combat styles are more effective against normal weapons, while the Chi combat styles are best against heavy weapons, and the Jin combat styles are the best choice for lightweight weapons. The game gives you the freedom to mix and match any variation of the three, and it notifies you on which to use by looking at the colored arrows next to the enemy's health bar. If it's blue and pointed upwards, you're using a style that's effective against that weapon type. If it's red and pointed downwards, you're at a disadvantage, and the white icon indicates no advantage for either you or the enemy. Much like Noe, each stance has its own moveset, but here each combat style can learn up to 3 martial skills, assigned to R1 square, R1 triangle, and R1X. Becoming a master in a particular combat style will allow you to add a 4th veiled art in the R1 circle slot. The more advanced combos are centered around the Violent Gale skill, which consists of rapid stance and weapon switching to seamlessly blend together combos instead of variations of square and triangle like Noe. This all has a pretty high skill ceiling, especially when you add in the option to use grappling rope in combat, along with various other weapons and environmental hazards. You also have a weapon proficiency system, each weapon type will be leveled individually, and sticking with one weapon that best suits you is highly recommended. As your proficiency increases, you'll acquire buffs, skill points, and abilities, while your proficiency in unequipped weapons will also increase because you gain additional proficiency in the weapons your opponents hold when you defeat them. This prevents unequipped weapons from becoming useless to you as you advance further into the game. Now you also have bond transfers and transmogrification. Bond transfers let you move passive abilities and effects from one piece of gear to another, and this feature is available at every blacksmith shop. Transmogrification is changing the appearance of a piece of armor or any other equipment while maintaining its perks. You're free to customize your armor's visual appearance at any time by simply visiting the Longhouse. Both of these features are surprisingly simple and easy to use. Now, I was really impressed with the transmogrification. Basically, every piece of armor that you get the skin of it at the Longhouse when you go to redesign. So even if you sell it, you still have that skin. You still have that option to change any other piece of equipment to look like that. This is probably the best transmog system I've ever experienced in any RPG I played. And that brings me to my next point. I was pleasantly surprised by how much of an RPG this game is. Skill trees, classes, multiple dialogue options, and the bond system you're presented with are all a welcome addition to the already established foundation of the Noe formula. There are 4 different skill trees: strength, dexterity, charm, and intellect. You can unlock new abilities by spending skill points or rare skill points that best suit your playstyle. Some skills also unlock a lot of important mechanics such as assassinations, finishers, enhanced dialogue options, and much more. Now, skills don't affect specific types of primary weapons, but they do increase the damage and other aspects of secondary weapons like revolvers, bow and arrows, and shurikens. Blade sharpening origins are basically this game's version of classes, and they just consist of predetermined stats for specific builds and playstyles. And last but not least, the platforming and overall traversal system here is also top notch. At times they merge the grappling hook, horse riding, and gliding all together perfectly. Your character can use the grappling hook in combination with the glider to gain altitude and cover more distance without losing momentum. You're also capable of landing on your horse and jumping off it at full speed to continue gliding. Everything feels surprisingly smooth and responsive also. My only complaint was there's no clear indicator for the buildings you can't climb. I'm going to give this game a 9 out of 10, and I believe it's currently on sale, but it may not be depending on when you watch this video, so I'm also recommending this at full price. I was impressed with the amount of quality content available here, and I completely disagree with a lot of the other reviewers' complaints. This is a lengthy, complex game with a steep learning curve that I feel like a lot of reviewers rush through on the lowest possible difficulty with a limited understanding of its core mechanics and fundamentals. A lot of their complaints were addressed with me by simply playing the game more and paying more attention to all the tools and systems available. For example, I didn't have an issue with the large amount of loot you frequently received because I understood I needed to disassemble the excess items and use the crafting system to upgrade my current equipment instead of just selling the items. On top of this, you even have the option to auto sell or auto disassemble items based on rarity at every Veiled Edge banner. I also don't understand how you could call this map cluttered when you have complete control over how populated it becomes. This game gives you the ability to completely ignore the vast majority of its side content. Rise of the Ronin feels like a mashup of Noe 2, Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, or Dragon Age, and I absolutely love this unique blend. Team Ninja did a fantastic job with their very first open world game, and to avoid spoilers and conserve time, I was not able to talk about all that's being offered here. But for me personally, this has been one of the best games I've played all generation, and I had to force myself to stop playing it numerous times. If you love the Noe series, Way of the Samurai, Ninja Gaiden, or if you think you might be interested in an action RPG set in feudal Japan, I highly recommend this game. Well, hopefully y'all enjoyed the video, man. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll be back with another one. Peace.
Thanks to the Igaru style, my skills aren't limited to it. For instance, I have studied the powerful Hayabusaru style that has been passed down in secret by the clan of dragons for generations. I assume you've heard of it as a warrior of the Veiled Edge. Unfortunately, I am not at liberty to divulge how I came to learn it.